Good morning, watchers. Welcome to Brother Sal's Sunday gathering at the storehouse. I'm so pleased to have you back again, and I'm very pleased to be here. Tony's with me again today. Good morning, Tony.
Hey, Dad.
And I want to start this out today by reminding you that the key to the end times is awareness. And we learned that so many years ago, and the only way to be aware is to watch to see what's going on in line with the landscape that the prophecy painted, the prophecy of Daniel, because it was the sealed one. Everything starts happening after the unsealing. And of course, in the beginning, we said it was going to be hard to see because it was a time when it was just getting started 34 years ago when we started watching this. But we come to a time when it would be obvious and evident that the prophecy of Daniel is fulfilling itself right on the stage of history. And that means you can see the players, who they are, what they're doing, how they're reacting. And we know the general story and the layout from the prophecy, but the coming to pass, what's really happening on the ground, has been very, very strange. And it takes a watch of a lot of different directions right now to maybe tie the whole thing together. And I don't think we can tie it together yet, Tom, but we're getting closer and closer with each week that goes by that we see new evidence of what might be going on. And as we were talking a little while ago, some of the new things that we're beginning to understand might be coming out of this Islamic scholar that you listened to see what he had to say. I found it amazing, his conclusions. So what do you think?
Well, it's getting, for me, the issue is getting very complicated now. Trying to unravel all of the strings that we've been following for so many years, down all of the rabbit holes and the various misinformation and bad information and misunderstood information and traditional information, so that I find now that there's a whole bunch of questions tied up in every look at what's going on. There's, when you mentioned the prophecy of Daniel, well, I still see that through the vision of Daniel, we're looking for this deal on Temple Mount, this 7-year covenant with many, this false prince that's going to declare himself God in their sanctuary. You know, all of these details that we've been following, and indeed those players seem to be identifiable in history. The Hashemite king becomes the viable player. The three that in Daniel's prophecy were to be uprooted to make way for this seemingly less significant horn have indeed, we seem to be on the third one. Libya was uprooted, Iraq was uprooted, and now it's my contention that ISIS, the whole formation of ISIS, now that more and more we're trying to read between the lines and see the week by week developments in the news, I'm starting to realize ISIS wasn't so much presented to the Islamic people as a false caliphate because they're too aware of their own religion, their own political system, their own geography for that. But instead it's the false flag, if you will, it's the face of the third uprooting, because there was no way to go in there legitimately and take out Syria, but through this ISIS uprising. Well, now all of a sudden Bashar Assad's fighting for his life and we've got nothing to do with it. We're just supporting those poor souls that are fighting against his awful regime, who've chosen for themselves to rise up at this time, you know. So anyway, it's such a quagmire of lies and deceits that go back for, you know, in some cases generations, in other cases decades, you know, generations in the sense of the Islamic State and the promise from the English monarchy or the English military, really, to give the Middle East to the Hashemites 100 years ago and let them have the Islamic State that they fought for in helping the English drive the Ottoman Empire out of there. So in some cases it's a generations old attachment. In other cases you're talking about decades with regard to this New World Order emergence. You know, and this is the element of it that's become so much an interest. It's a real dichotomy to me. It's very interesting and yet it's very disturbing. It brings all of the elements of, you know, what we all call evil. You know, the real hurting of others for the capture of resources and such. That's been the real history of the modern, not just modern, but the Western Christian, Judaic Christian civilization. And that brings in this Islamic scholar who seems to be a bit obscure out there. He doesn't get the hits that half of these nutball Christians with their fear-mongering get on the internet. But this guy's a real scholar and pointing out that all of this false jihadism and where it comes from, it's got nothing to do with the Quran. These are all lies that we're telling the West to make them think that this is what Islam is, and thereafter they're going to kill everybody with the sword and such. This guy's a scholar that's pointing out that in fact their scriptures portray a group of Christian people in the end who are the closest to the people of Islam, who are the most loving friends, I think was the words that he translated. And how odd that is. And so he brings us through the history from the Byzantine Empire and the Arabs who had lost faith at that time and were pagans. They were part of the Persian Empire, essentially. They were all for the worship of the stars and the planets and all these other things, and not some sort of one invisible God. And that because the Christians were the only other people around that had that same worship at the time, that because of course the Jews weren't in the land anymore when that was going on, that they were allied naturally, culturally. They were the only two people in the region that were against the worship of stones and trees and planets and artificial gods, and for the worship of some one unseen God. And so that made them, in an essence, allies. And in the Quran, there are these passages that present them as allies and yet present to the Muslim that they should not make friends and ally themselves with Jews and Christians who are themselves allied. And he brings it into this modern world and demonstrates how from the time of the Byzantine Empire, when the so-called Roman Empire lost its foothold in that land, and the Quranic prophecy became true, that they would lose one, win one kind of thing, that they would lose, but then they would win. And now the Christians, what he calls Western Christianity, set up in Rome, in the Vatican, and immediately was at odds with what he calls Orthodox Christianity, which set up in Russia, and was at the heart of all of these early wars where the West persecuted Russia, because it was the Western Christians persecuting the Orthodox Christians. This is the opinion of this particular Arab scholar, or Islamic scholar. I don't know if he's Arab, he might be Indian or part Indian, but he's an Islamic scholar. And yeah, he's pointing out that because of the way the history comes down, what we're getting as a Christian world over here in this Western Christianity are the lies about Islam, about our enemy, because what this Zionistic connection, which is where he's drawing it, the reason these Jews and Christians are allied is to get the Holy Land back. to possess the Holy Land, and in the Judeo-Christian understanding of the Scriptures, for the Jews to rule indefinitely from the Holy Land and to rebuild the temple. And since they don't have that now, they need to subdue the land around Palestine, set Palestine, set Jerusalem up as the ruling city in the world, and rebuild the temple. That's what they're anticipating they're going to get done with this war, is where he's going with his premise. That's where this alliance, this Zionistic Judeo-Christian world. Now, we draw that into what we've been talking about for some weeks off and on with who is the northern tribes, the house of Israel, this wicked people, right? And who is Babylon at the end, this wicked system that crashes practically in a day and affects the whole world. Merchants, the other side of the world weep over it. Who are we talking about? We're not talking about Babylon over there in Iraq, obviously. And so most scholars have been on to the reality that Babylon is really can be traced back in the Jewish tradition as code for the system, the whole religious anti-Hebrew religion, which was essentially the worship of planets and stars, the whole Chaldean thing that Abraham was called out of, if you think about it that way, in the deeper sense of being called out of the world. Here was a stargazer himself, called out to get the story from God about what I guess becomes the Mazzaroth, the Jewish understanding of the stars and the zodiac. So I'm relating it now to this idea that this Zionistic movement of these Jews and Christians identify now with what's been taught for many, many years as the British Israelite theory, right? That the part of those northern tribes became the Irish and the English and then the Americans, and it's from, I've never seen anything that's ever refuted it, and one of the ways you can tell is when certain substantial religious ideologies are never challenged by the status quo, so that they have a nice bottled little answer to that, right? Like the priests. Everybody knows the priests. They changed everything to get control of the people, where Jesus was just a good and wise teacher that was trying to raise a revolution. That becomes the popular version to answer, and everybody feels comfortable they have an answer. But funny enough, the whole British Israelite theory is one of those things that the status quo never answers for, whether it's the Christian church world or not, because I suppose historically it seems to be almost irrefutable. They had to go somewhere. They had to become someone. They had to leave some trace of their culture. And geez, you find it in the Stone of Scone and these traditions of the royalty of the British Isles, and then on to America. And then it fits the prophecy of Isaiah, the lion and the cub, and the land quartered by its river systems and terrible from its beginnings. And I don't have time to go into all of that without really losing the point, but I'm telling you, it's becoming all these strings that have been drawn out over all the years, woven together into a tapestry, and that tapestry now has become quite complex. And yet, I suppose the farther you back away from it, it is a very simple, for me, it's the metaphysics of love. It's almost like a big yin-yang thing painted broad, but very few people will ever get that perspective, especially when we're studying within the Scriptures. And so within the Scriptures, what's fascinating me now is coming down this, as you say, Daniel being unsealed creates this whole momentum for all of this scriptural revelation. Yes. And in Daniel itself, it says that upon this revealing, people would run to and fro and knowledge would increase. And indeed, here we are with so much increased knowledge through the internet. It's an odd way to think of it being prophesied, but son of a gun. If knowledge hasn't increased tremendously, and the internet coming out in conjunction with all of these other bits of historical data that are putting this into place. And whereas this is where I'm having a hard time how to explain to our audience, and especially fundamentalist Christians, and I don't want to send any farther away from me than I do with some of my comments, is that all the traditions that we've been handed down as a culture have been primarily lies. That this whole, there are no Muslim terrorists out there that are wanting to kill us that we didn't create. And I don't mean create like we're paying each of them now. We've fomented this hate so that there are people that actually hate us. But do they have any sort of capability of striking out against us? Not at all. They have only the perceived resiliency of trying to maintain their own independence from us. And even that is, as we see with Iran, we're not going to permit it. We want access to your culture. We're not letting you build any bombs. We've got them all, only the UN. In other words, what this Islamic cleric, and I don't know if he's a cleric, he's a scholar, I believe. This Islamic scholar is pointing out as this Western Christian Zionistic Jewish alliance whose military arm is NATO, trying to fulfill the Bible themselves by subduing the land around the Holy Land, setting Jerusalem up as the ruling capital of the world for the Jews to rule out of, rebuilding the temple. That's what the Messiah is going to do. So they can become the Messiah. Whoever's doing this can take it in symbolic terms, rather than having to wait for some man from the sky to appear, so to speak. They can simply realize that David was just a nothing among them, but he fought Goliath and he became their God-sent leader. And so anyone can rise up and be that person, provided they had an army at the time. David wasn't alone. So, they have their justification, I suppose, but the twisted thing for any Christian to imagine is this subduing all these people through force. Really? Is that what Jesus would do? Is that what Jesus did? Did he not say when they came for him, hey, well, put your sword away, Peter. Don't you think I could call down legions if I needed them? If I wanted to, don't you think I could escape these guys? The whole point of being a Christian is knowing that you have a higher calling than your own physical preservation, and that it's justified by a spiritual reality that you believe in, and a creator or God, however you can manifest it in your own mind, that makes it real, that makes it believable, that really supports it. Because see, where I lost my faith, if you will, years ago, was in the realization that all of my mental images of God were really of these pictures you see of a bearded white, of Zeus, of one of these Greek images of a man in a flowing robe somewhere in a cloudy scene, or in a starry sky, or out there somewhere. And once I started studying metaphysics, I realized that it was just so underminable. How could God really be out there somewhere? It's as silly as the Russian quip from the 60s. When they first went into space, they said, there's no God. We've been out, we went and we didn't see him. Yeah. So, how silly is that metaphysically to imagine that God is out there in space? But what is the real fundamentalist Christian vision of this God that judges? Because as we've talked about before, what I see in it all is modern Christianity, if not the complete Western Christian departure from Orthodox Christianity, is in the way of condemnation rather than salvation. Christ is the means by which all are saved. And in the Wednesday Bible study, that's sort of, I try and demonstrate that while it's hard to go so far upstream as to prove that everybody is saved through Christ, it's easy to prove that the scripture doesn't say everybody who doesn't believe in Christ in this life is going to hell. That's easy to prove. Anyone who spends 20 minutes reading the scriptures could determine that for themselves if they could get beyond the vision. This is what I'm trying to break down, that image that we have in our heads of everything. That it's the way the psychologists have helped us see how we work, how our minds work. And of course we live in a culture that's been preying upon that understanding.
And they have the internet that just publish multitudes upon multitudes of misinformation, bad information, no information.
Yeah, but that all comes out as this jumble after a generation of brainwashing. So it's just the tip of it's not the problem. It's just another tool in the chest. It's the fine, if you will, if we're getting to all those final tools in the chest, where the psych ops have been going so well now that Americans can be given bubble after bubble and never take back their financial system. Right? Be shown that the Federal Reserve is, it's a private group of European bankers that essentially are stealing the economy out from under the workers. That's what it is. And they don't make no bones about it. They just, they let you keep pretending you're okay with it, even while you complain.
And it is what it is.
Yeah, and it just is what it is. And we all keep fighting through it. And if it ever gets so bad, like it did, say, in the Depression, or maybe when the hippie revolution, when they tried to really take back the government, fine, there was just enough technology had come around where people were in communication, and it was still virgin enough that there were artists, there were journalists, there were editors and educators, and the word did get out that, holy mackerel, there is really a cartel of bums, crooks, greedy, lying, you know what, and they're the ones in charge. Man, we got to get money out of the system. We got to change. It's all there. You can go back and read the stuff from the 60s and 70s. These guys knew exactly what was going on. I mean, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and these guys there. John F. Kennedy, look what he said before they blew his brains out. About the real, here's a guy who's had the Bay of Pigs situation with Russia and this whole Cold War and the buildup of military arms. And what does he say? Our greatest threat isn't from any exterior enemy. So, and essentially same thing that was said a couple years before by Eisenhower, and almost, same sort of tone, like, watch out for this military-industrial complex. They're more powerful than any enemy we got. They're from within, and they have the power, and they can usurp our freedoms and our laws and our government and our system and our judicial and our education. And, and by then, really, they already had in premise this whole secret society, rings within rings. Cecil Rhodes Foundation pretty much set up the modern political system and banking system of the West. If you don't, do your research on Cecil Rhodes and he doesn't even have a name for his secret society. All this other stuff is a bunch of fluff and scare tactics, skull and bones. And this is to recruit these dumb college kids to see who's really pathetic enough, of these elite kids to really have no backbone, total programming, that sort of spirit of I want in, I'll be a blood brother. So, we make a big deal about these guys, but they're nothing in the sense of they're the ones that carry out all the ridiculous absurdities that have to be done for people to sort of rule a world through banking, through money, and through manipulation, through force, through police, through prisons, through education systems to get your way, to always have your way and always have it come out with you on top. You can't be a nice guy who's looking out for your neighbor, can you? Love your neighbor as yourself doesn't exactly work from their standpoint, which is why they've had to undermine all of that morality. And they've done that through subjectivism. This other thing that I try and teach on. I feel like I'm bombarded by this constantly growing, pentagram, or it becomes more dimensional and it has more facets and more sides, and every one becomes its own very distinct facet and mirror now in this whole game of mirrors, so that it's hard for me to even relate to many of the things I thought were true a year ago. I'm starting to see so much of this stuff unraveling before my very eyes. And, I think it's important to keep pointing out to people in the West, and then especially in America right now, what they're doing with this mobilization of military. It has to be taken into account. There seems to be some independent and quite reasonable people out there on the internet saying, hey, this is no drill. I've been in the military. This is an operation. These guys are, I've been saying it just from the money side, all my life. You don't send all that stuff out. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money suddenly to be thrown around when you got to ask for it from the taxpayer. You got to justify it in the budget. You're trying to build all your new drones and blah, blah, blah. You got wars to fight. This thing's supposed to go on forever, this war in the Middle East, right? There's no end to the support we got to give. And yet we got the money to send this stuff all around the country, and then the tie-in with the Walmarts, and then there's just so many red flags that we're coming to this this orchestrated time of I don't want to use the word destruction, but I'm afraid that's what it's going to be. It's a diversion, but it's destruction, because again, I talked, I think, a week or so ago about the Iron Mountain report. I've been talking about that because it's something I've just learned about recently, and I think it's a very important discovery. These documents from the 60s, come on, these show the mentality. And have we seen this? The money players, have they changed since the 60s? These United Nations people have been around for long before that. It's the same there, the banker, Goldman Sachs, these guys, this has all been going on a long time, boy, construing the game board toward their own ideals. So this is what I'm saying. So we have the reports on their ideals in these 50-year-old documents in which they have these round tables and they have these think tanks, and they said, what do we do in a peaceful world? And they said, well, people are going to have too much leisure time, and they're going to get educated, and they're not going to fall for all the scams, the money scam, that we need money for this, and all the false justice system and all this kind of stuff. And so the most stable societies are those of times of war. People are so scared of what might happen to them if the enemy, the perceived dangers of an enemy invasion or an enemy takeover or something like that is enough to keep people following any kind of policies, no matter how offensive they would have been outside of a war, scenario. And so this is the kind of thinking that was coming out of these people. And as we talked about, they looked at alien invasion, but how do you keep that credible? So the only other thing is the planet. And this another string. Here we are up against another facet, climate change. And everybody's got a position on that, climate change. It's real, it's not real, the science is there, it's not there, the government's controlling it, nobody's controlling it. But interestingly enough, just if you want to look at the forensic evidence of it all, this Iron Mountain report, the only thing they came up with that even touches a state of war, or if you really had aliens invading, is real detrimental danger to the planet. the organism we all share, if we all thought that was in peril, some sort of imminent peril, well then we'd be willing to put up with also losses of freedoms, rights, you know, certain things we wouldn't put up with otherwise, but we all could vote to make the sacrifice because, well, after all, if the oceans die, we die. So that kind of thing could be used. And so when you combine that with understanding also that during the Margaret Thatcher years, when she had the coal people striking in England, England being such a small country, depended upon the coal to power the country. Margaret Thatcher was not popular with the coal workers. Geez, I guess why? Because they had terrible working conditions, and they got to watch the Margaret Thatcher friends get wealthy, 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 while the coal workers got dead, dead, dead. So they struck. So what did England do? They came up with global warming. I mean, this is just history, you guys. This is when global warming enters the political dialogue, is with Margaret Thatcher arguing for nuclear power in England because coal was adding to global warming anyway, and so it wasn't efficient, and it was going to add to the melting of the glaciers, whereas nuclear energy could actually help save the planet. And so it was originally used to push the nuclear energy platform, which was part of breaking the coal unions and the need for coal anyway, because it was very labor intensive, and that took people. So you either had to import them from China like we used to and put the poor Chinese to death, or you had to start paying or update the technology, or well, no. So nuclear technology is what they wanted. You know, damn the fact that it's dangerous, because they're gonna, they're arrogant enough to know they're gonna outthink themselves. They're gonna invent a better way. They're gonna contain the problems and overcome them, because that's what they do as evolving species. And since they're the master race, everything they do is by definition the progressive thing to do. Right? Every thought they have that breaks them out of another boundary is one that they don't want to have to reflect on some morality, some law, whether it's God's law or anybody else's. They don't want to have to deal with that. They found out there is no such reality. They're the top of the food chain, both through natural selection and through some genetic blessing. They happen to be the master race. They're the top of the evolutionary ladder. And so it would be irresponsible to let the savages down below, run the show. So from their standpoint, it's all quite legitimate being able to, genocide, which, as we've talked about, I talk about all the time, the North American natives, 19 million of them, 3 times at least what Hitler killed of the Jews. Nobody, you don't find that mentioned in your history. I never grew up learning that. You learn some of the stories, and it's okay to talk about how we did some wrong things, but it was just a Wild West kind of, it was more it's more blame it on the moon excuse, thrill of the moment. We're going west, and they're trying to protect their territory, and hey, there's bound to be clashes, and everybody did what they could, and it is what it is. No, truth is, it was a massive genocide, just a massive genocide. We committed genocide because they essentially said, no, just like the Mexicans, see? But, a few years later, when we got out west far enough to encounter what was then Old Mexico, which, for those of you that don't know your history or geography, it's California, Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona. This was all part of Mexico, legally. Just like Hawaii was a sovereign nation before the old Sanford Dole got there. These are all just crimes of humanity that have gone on in the name of this great Christian nation. And I have to draw it all into Revelation with the idea that, in the end, this great Christian nation is going to be, or the Christian church, I should say, is going to be characterized as lukewarm, neither hot nor cold. And because of that, says Christ, I wish you were hot or cold, but because you're lukewarm, I'm going to spit you out of my mouth. Again, that just does not sound like anything I'm proud of if I'm a Christian and I'm in that position. I mean, it seems to, if you're a Christian, the thing you'd want to ask yourself is, geez, what's he mean by that? Am I lukewarm? What does he mean by hot or cold? Oh, I really believe in him. No, I'm hot. I'm hot. See, and so I talk about that we go over that in the Bible study. What does it really mean to be a Christian? What would that mean to be hot, to be following that master as opposed to just claiming his name and following the worldly way that he denounced? That might be what he means by lukewarm. So you start pulling all these strings together. This government that, if we want to go back generations now, if we want to even go back to antiquity and really try and draw it together, this modern expression of the falling away of the house of Israel from God. They're becoming prostitutes of his reality and becoming really just the denizens and owners of the world, right? If you want to put it in a symbolic way, they accepted that temptation of Satan on Jesus on the mountain. I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world if you'll bow down to me, right? They accepted that, symbolically, let's say, and they go out into the world now and they become this, the English nation, which becomes the greatest empire in the world. Most atrocities of history are attributed. I mean, not Rome, not Alexander the Great. No, the England. Remember, they're the ones who went and slaughtered all the Indians when Gandhi said, "Sorry, we don't want you here, but you have to. We'll starve you." Okay, and they did. We'll kill you. We'll imprison you. We'll beat you. Okay, and they did. Until the public opinion was so strong, and they realized, wow, this is not good. This isn't working, and they got the heck out of there. But yeah, the more atrocities by the English Empire until maybe the American Empire, the extension of all that when that banking power really took hold through the Rothschilds' central banking system, and you have basically our modern world start growing out of that world, which, as I say, may have this ancient connection to these tribes of Israel who have this desire to own that land for them. They don't need God to give it to them, or maybe in their own eyes that's all part of it because they were divorced from God. They may not even know their tribe of Israel anymore. All they know is they're going to possess Jerusalem, not the Muslims or anyone else. They're going to fulfill the prophecy on earth. And if that's the case, it gives some sort of foundation to the idea of the Zionism that supports America. Because that's one of the hardest strings for me or dots to connect with any sort of validity. I just don't know. But all the surface level, all the circumstantial evidence anyway, is quite clear. The lobbying money, the guns, the trade agreements, the way that no matter what the public opinion is on Israel and their oppression, their occupation of a land that should be under some sort of humble treaties. I mean, just because the English Empire declared that Palestine was a mandate, well, is that really fair? Who gave them the right to declare Palestine a mandate? The Arabs did not agree. And so nothing's ever been worked out in a symbiotic way there. It's always been a hostile thing, and you can make the case, I think, that's always been the intention for the 100 years to take that territory, and that's where it started, by the mandate to have that land. And putting the Jews there where they would start warring, and immediately they got Jerusalem, had to give half of it back, because otherwise the world would have went nuts, right? But they wound up capturing half of Jerusalem right off the bat. They've never given any of that back. They gave the Sinai back because who wants it, right? But so they used it for land deals, but they've never stopped being an occupier in the eyes of much of their neighbors. Mm-hmm. And so that's never been satisfied. And America, this country that supports democracy and freedom, and yet it's not democracy that the millions of people around them don't want them there, but the few people at the United Nations say yes, that's supporting democracy and freedom. And so yet in all of this, we don't budge. All my life, we don't budge. Israel, man, we send the guns, we defend Israel, that's it. You guys have to back off. We don't make treaties, we don't make concessions. We defend with arms this little plot of land that we carved out, alongside this aggravation that the Islamic State was denied 50 years earlier, 30 years earlier, really. If you look at the formation of Israel, so you're only 30 years earlier that you screwed the Hashemites as the English Empire, leaving the territory, and you screwed the Hashemites and gave it to France. That's caused nothing but problems in the territory ever since. So, I mean, these aren't age-old, these aren't ancient things. This is 100 years. But in our world, we've been so dumbed down. We don't read classic books. We don't have libraries. People don't read anymore. They Google it. And you read 2 paragraphs, and that's enough. It's amazing to me, all the news stories on these, like Al Monitor, all these mouthpiece media. The news stories are like 300 words, 500. What can you? 500 words. They say nothing. They say nothing. They give you the hype they want you to know, or the disinformation, or the piece of it that they're intending for you to be moved by. But they say absolutely nothing in regard to a mind that would be inquiring as to the details of the subject matter. No, nothing. So we know nothing of the last 100-year history, but that 100-year history is what has us here. This is why I keep coming from this angle on it, because to argue it from the news, ISIS moved here, and Syria is doing this, and the Iran talks, that's all smoke and mirrors. That doesn't mean, that's like saying, does Iran exist? Of course they exist. Are they doing or saying probably half of the things that we say they are in our rags of papers? I doubt it. I imagine they're saying and doing just the opposite. For instance, how is it this Islamic scholar knows quite clear that all these jihadi things are nothing but false flag, CIA sponsored, that he says the money's all coming from Saudi Arabia, so there you go. There's your client state. Saudi Arabia. So Pakistan, he says, for most of their existence, unfortunately, they've been just a client state. Their government and military is just an extension of the U.S. military over there in a strategic location. Is that something most Americans and Christians understand as the facts of the matter? Do you read that in your normal, New York Times? They allude to it, but I tell you, it's always very subtly to take you on a path away from the recognition that the whole thing is being framed for your viewing. It's like the Truman Show, is what the tapestry is showing me more and more. Yeah. It's like the damn Truman Show, to where it's almost like nothing is what it seems. I just have to add this, because personally I felt very vindicated today that for the last 2-3 years, I've been struck by the fact that if there is a God, you're telling me who are the people that God's going to be most satisfied with? The ones that don't loan money at interest, the ones that don't, become a debauched society over a little money, the ones that don't allow themselves to just get drunk and run around in bikinis, and right, we've glamorized that as our freedoms. Okay, so there's a real argument to be made over the liberty of being human and the confinement of limiting yourself to some theological context. So I'm not trying to cross that line. I'm saying under the theological context, Christian or Muslim, Jew, Christian or Muslim, which one do you think the particular God of heaven is most satisfied with? The ones who've built their whole system on war and financial corruption. I mean, really, financial, this is what this guy's seeing as well. This financial corruption, this loaning money at usury. And now you come into our modern history of the Rothschilds' takeover of the Central Bank of England, and then the creation of the other central banks, and the whole creation of the idea of central banking as a way to subdue the world, the economic world, and ensure that he always remained on top of the heap, which is a natural enough inclination. I don't think any of us, given Rothschild's position, wouldn't have been thinking the same thing. Now that I have it all, how do I keep it all? How do I keep it all in my family and not give it away to some barbarian or whoever? You know, Genghis Khan comes along with his hordes and wants to take all these castles I'm building, all this infrastructure, all this money, all these cities, everything that my money is building. How do I ensure I'll always have it? I mean, I think that's pretty natural. And so he instituted his fractional reserve banking to essentially enslave everyone that borrowed money from him. And when you have all the money in the beginning, and you can say, hey, I'll set you up. This will be your territory. You give life and death. You're the king. You know, but I loan you the money to be the king, see? And if I don't like what you're doing, I can loan money to someone else to be the king, and he'll kill you. And that's basically the history since the Rothschild takeover of central banking. That's how money keeps the power that money wants in place to do the things that they want to get done, so that it doesn't matter whether if they want to dig a hole there. I don't care if it's a burial site. I don't care if it's a sovereign nation. I don't, you know, that's it. They're going to dig a hole there. You're going to move. You know, and so the establishment of the Federal Reserve banking system, and then the military arm of the United Nations that comes right on the heels of that, is the way that the Western world has propagated its, what, Christianity? Are you friggin' kidding me? And so that's what this Islamic scholar is trying to point out. Hey, Christians, come on now. Let me tell you what the Quran says. Don't think that what you're hearing from your media and these people, those are not Muslims. That's not what the Quran says. Even our own government, they won't give us the money that the Quran demands, which are gold and silver coins, or at least something backed by gold and silver coins for the ease of exchange. But integrity is the point. Mm-hmm. The money has actual integrity. It's not a scam to enslave somebody and keep somebody else from losing their spot on the pyramid, see? And so that's really what's driving this modern world. And like I say, I think every Christian, everybody that's got any sort of religious understanding needs to ask themselves, I mean, what does God want? Oh, Jesus, 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 but yeah, let's kill all those friggin' Muslims, and let's by force fulfill the Bible. Is that what Jesus did? I mean, and do we think he couldn't have? Didn't he say he could? Didn't he say he could? Didn't Satan in the temptation say, you know, you can turn these stones to bread? What are you starving for? You know, why don't you command some angel to come down, and if you throw yourself off this cliff, God will send his angel. See, so the scripture seems to say that Jesus could have used force, but the whole point of love is that he didn't use force. And that's what the Jewish nation had already become so corrupt that he could call them sepulchres. Mm-hmm. You look white on the outside like this beautiful mausoleum, but you're full of dead bones. You're full of flesh stinking and corruption, right? That's what's going on inside you while you look so pretty. You look the part. You pay the tithe, you do the Sabbath, but your scales aren't straight. You know, you're stealing land from the widows and orphans. Your justice is swayed by who puts more money in your bank. See? And so that's always, God, is it really just a coincidence that we accuse are leaders of exactly the same thing? Are we not talking ideology here? We're not talking technology. We're not talking about iPhones, swords versus nuclear weapons. We're talking about the same ideology of give versus take. You know, that's the difference. And the Jews went down that road of take, putting on their show, and by the time the Messiah gets there, I mean, he not only spits them out of his mouth, he just, you know, he insults them. When you read those Gospels of what Jesus said to those Pharisees, he's not harder on anybody than he is on those Pharisees. He's easier on prostitutes, tax collectors. I mean, I imagine if there was a gay parade in town, he'd be a lot lighter on the gay parade than he was on those Pharisees. And so it just shows you, you know, that to me is the nucleus of what's going on. So when you come to this modern world, the big thing to me is, wow, the people that we want to call our enemy, we the Christians, who I'll use that term. I like the difference, the Western Christianity versus the Orthodox Christianity. And when I say Orthodox, I mean, let's say what the first church was doing, claiming nothing for themselves. There were no needy among them. Everywhere they went, they just sort of were spreading this good news that life had been redeemed, kind of thing, and that they were going to live forever. They didn't have to worry about dying. They didn't have to worry about their worldly possessions, so they could take care of each other, and that was the sign that that's what they believed. I mean, because otherwise you live in the world, it doesn't make sense to give away all your stuff, especially in those days. You're going to leave with one tunic and no sandals, no purse. You're going to go out there like that, the animals are going to eat you. You know, you got nothing. They said, no, I don't care. I got God. Now I know. That was the whole point, and that's what made them such a vision, as you say, to be pointed toward, rather than what they've become, which is an offense to be pointed at. And so that's where I keep trying to, you know, from years ago, I had this feeling that, wow, how can I feel good as a Christian and hate these Muslim terrorists when they're the ones that don't charge interest? They're the ones that bow 5 times a day. They're the ones that don't drink. They're the ones that don't go to, you know, naked pool parties. They're the ones that deny themselves these pleasures of the flesh that are supposed to be so wonderful for me to free myself. And yet, well, look at our cultures. I don't really know anything about theirs, except it survived for a long time without killing off all their environment. I mean, we seem to be doing that. It's our culture that's done that. Us, these free ones who think it grand to just make ourselves God, and there is no morals. There's nothing above us. We don't have to worry about whether we, whether we're corrupted at all by any of the things that
we don't find ourselves accountable to anybody.
That's right. We don't find that we have no accountability, so that we find no corruption in ourselves, because there's nothing to account for. And then when you look at other cultures that do, the Hindu culture as well, although they're on a weird system of revolving lifetimes, and so they're really just trying to make it to a better life on the next go-around, but it does create in them a much more morally and ethically sound human being, because they believe that that is the only way they are going to achieve a higher or better reincarnation, is that they learn something in this life. And what there is to learn is that you don't hurt other people to get what you want. You find a way to give, or you find a way to be satisfied with your position in life, and do your duty and all these sort of things. And as you learn these lessons, you move up that scale as you reincarnate to learn higher lessons. So at least it produces a better person, I'm saying. The Muslim world, I'm starting to realize, well, geez, we know nothing about it except what we've been fed, which now I realize would be all lies. It would be all propaganda to make me think, just like they made me think about Cuba, just like they made me think about Mexico, that this is such a horrible place. Instead, yeah, they want me to think that, because once you come here to Mexico, you realize, wow, this is the way I used to hear America was like. everybody owned their home. They built on a little at a time. You know, everybody just sort of, if you wanted to have a little store, you just opened the front of your house and you could do whatever you want. You could stop your little truck along the road and sell the pineapples that you grew, or, you know, all that sort of stuff. Just the same way, you know, lemonade stand on the side of the road.
Mm-hmm.
Try and do that now if you're not 3 years old.
They arrest you if you're 3.
Yeah, well, they at least make you go get your mother so we can give her a ticket. But no, so you get the idea. This is a real free society in the sense that even though they're burdened by all the government corruption that keeps their resources funneling to a small group of people and ultimately to the same bankers, which is why they don't have as much unrest down here as other countries. But they do have some because they try and hang on to a few things, because the people here do revolt. But it does make for a much nicer life at the level of the working class, who have fresh food on every corner. They're free to engage in almost any kind of enterprise that they, you know, if your grandmother knit socks, well, you can sit out on the corner almost anywhere that you choose and sell those socks. And if it's a little more structured city or whatever, then there's plenty of, like, what we would call a flea market. They call tianguis here, which are like the open air markets that are set up just to be there normally over the weekend, although some are permanent, but all the proprietors show up just to be there for a day or maybe 2 days and then break down and go home. And those are very inexpensive, you know, that everybody that wants to, for the most part, can take part in the marketplace.
Sure.
And so all of these kind of things, we don't want Americans to see. The government doesn't want Americans to realize how free it is here, how in that case, you know, and many other things. So it's hard, because I know I'm speaking to people who watch a lot of TV and get their news from news sources and they're going to think, oh, but Mexico, the drug wars and this and that. But I tell you, what's going on in Mexico is absolute to the child's play compared to what goes on in the state of California day in and day out, and other states that are really money centers. Chicago, New York, Atlanta, you know, Texas, you know, all sorts of places where these money centers congregate. The deals that go on and the people that are hurt, even with pushes of buttons on a computer every day, just dwarf any sort of hostilities that go on in Mexico over people fighting over some resources down here amongst themselves. And as many people know, a couple years ago, the big thing that was exposed is how suddenly these drug cartels down here turned up having hundreds of high-powered weapons that were all traced back to the DEA, you know, American government. Yeah. So don't think. Anyway, Mexico's under they're in. You know, the Canadians are totally screwed. They're just totally part of the system. They are just another arm of the system. Canadian people have absolutely no chance to break out of the same thing that the Americans are in, and the Mexicans unfortunately have to go along. But the life is much more reasonable here, and they don't want you to know that. Cuba, you know, here's a guy, anybody could have got, I mean, come on, Castro, for all those years, could he have been that bad? I've known a lot of people that have been to Cuba now in the last 15 or 20 years. And I hear this, I mean, I've never heard a bad report, never. I hear only that the people are friendly, there's much more content than you find in any of our cities. Healthcare, of course, is free to everybody. I mean, and you consider this is a country that was cut off from the Western world. We kept those people down for, I mean, it's just another atrocity when you look at our history, the times we kept medical care, you know, things from going to them so that they couldn't advance. That's why their cars are from the 30s and 40s, because we didn't let anything get in there anymore. And it's while we were breaking Russia too, so Russia couldn't afford to just make Cuba some sort of fancy playground like we made Hawaii. So instead, we invested in our, or at least we let I would say historically, we would say we let all the gangsters invest in Puerto Rico and move offshore with their loot, because they weren't allowed to get in the big banker game, but they were allowed to take that loot and go places like Puerto Rico and be part of the drug trade, be in on it, but not the new world order move. See, that's why those you don't see the same amount of Italians in running anything anymore, not even the football teams. At one time, you got these gargantuan human beings playing football, and they're all being coached by 5-foot-tall Italian men that don't look they've ever held a football in their life. And then you find out sports is rigged by the mafia. And, okay, that's why Coach Shula looked like that. And they all look like little tiny Italians. They're all mobsters. But all those things have been streamlined nowadays, and so anyway, Cuba was where it could have, of course, been developed. It's probably one of the most resourceful places, self-sustaining places in all the world for its size. Pound for pound, yeah. Square kilometer for square kilometer. It's probably one of the most beautiful and resourceful places in all the world, and it's been kept. Probably for the New World Order kind of idea to develop once they depopulate and all. Anyway, but this is, I just keep trying to paint this tapestry to show people that this traditional view and the one you're going to get from TV, this fight with the Islamic terrorism. I mean, I don't know how I can help people break that, that channel. Until you unplug for long enough to really know that that's all just BS. That is programming, brainwashing, psych ops. I mean, they have a name for it. Go study the MK Ultra stuff. This is now declassified stuff from, some of it starts in the 40s after the defeat of the Nazis, because this was what these Nazi scientists that we then hired to come and work for us. I mean, who are they going to work for? You either got to kill them at Nuremberg or put them to work, because you're not going to let them go, work for somebody else. So you either got to kill them for what they did or put them to work. So we killed a few and we put the rest to work. That's the history. And these guys were working on all sorts of psychological operations. How do you get people, how do you control a human being ultimately without putting a gun to their head? How do you do it, subliminally? How do you do it through images? How do you do it through, what do you have to do? And so that has been going on a very long time. There's plenty of now, declassified documents from stuff that was going on in the 50s and 60s with regard to MK Ultra. There's a lot of evidence that people have put together, like the Kennedy assassination stuff that has been put together over the years. There's people that have put together, like the Robert Kennedy assassination with Sirhan, who, for his whole life never could, he never admitted to it and never could remember it. And when you watch videos, somebody did a neat video where it showed all the, the different interviews over the years that they did with this guy. They kept going back saying, come on, now it's been, 20 years, 30 years. Why don't you tell us what really happened? Everybody wants to know. You can make millions of dollars with a book. It became like nobody hates you anymore. Now they just want to know, why'd you do it? What happened? And you watch these videos and the guy's got that same look in his eyes. I don't remember anything from that day. And so it's funny when you look at that next to the MK Ultra, sort of what they were trying to achieve, because it was this same idea that you could program people, you could get them to perform a certain thing, and then have them in a psychological state that they, almost like an alcoholic who gets so drunk the next day they don't remember what they did, that you could induce that state in people. Anyway, all that kind of stuff plays into our modern versions of programming as its evidence. Now I call it forensic evidence, because there's just no doubt that the television and the way the political system's structured and the education system, it's all there to keep Americans from ever toppling the system. to just be led like sheeple to the final destination, which is this sort of eugenic concept of the master race, making the decisions. The Georgia Guidestones is a really interesting, funky little thread in this tapestry because, well, not least of all, because it was put up by the Rosicrucians, which are part of this. They go back. These are part of the people who have been in the centers of power for a long time, since that European power that centered around the Vatican. So these are really connected people. And so when they put up stones, very expensive stones, by the way, in the manner that they did, carved in all these languages, like they're trying to make a statement. This isn't a bunch of hippies throwing up some Burning Man. That's, this is some serious people putting up a serious monument. And what does that monument say? Maintain population and all, basically govern the planet like it's a lab experiment, and the people, because you're the ones that are supposed to do that. You're the chosen ones. So yeah, here we're coming down to it. I guess some people tune in for this for the Middle East news. So since I'm over the time today, let me just say that I find it interesting that I've been saying this now for a few weeks. Hey, what happened to this great war? I mean, they burned a pilot alive a few months ago. They chopped the heads off 100 and how many Coptic Christians in Egypt, and I mean, they've taken over the biggest resource in northern Iraq there, or Syria. I mean, I don't know. All this stuff. The king was going to fight a relentless war against Iraq. And now, as we've come into more of the political scene of America and the election stuff, it's funny how all of a sudden the shift. I don't hear about this great war against Iraq. I was just looking through the Al Monitor stories, as a matter of fact, and I just thought it was, almost funny. Corruption charges in Israel. Turkey's AKP party is trying to paint itself as the patriotic, God-fearing party. Rowdy soccer fan clubs are among the latest groups to run afoul of Egypt's sweeping new anti-terrorism laws. A Taliban delegation's visit to Tehran has tongues wagging about a possible rapprochement between two old enemies. In other words, Afghanistan and Iran are finally saying, hey, well, you can't be with those guys. You're going to have to be with me. But I just find it, where are all the stories about the threat to society of the war, the terrorism that's coming from these people that are chopping heads off? Anyway, I want to point out how controllable it all is.
Yeah, well, every time there's an election coming around, all this stuff always fades into the background.
Well, no, Dad, it doesn't. Not during World War II. Not when it's real. It's real. See, that's what I'm trying to get across. It's not real, is what people need to know, and you don't know that because you watch television and you think there's a war on terror, and you think America's the good guys and we're the Christians. But we're not acting like Christians, and we've never been good guys, and there is no war on terror. We're the war on terror, okay? And we're terrorizing the world. And if you want to really find out what's going on, look at what we're setting up for in America. Look what Russia's preparing for. We have the largest military mobilizations going on right now since World War II. Is that all because we all just have extra money to spend? Let's play some war games. Hell, economies are going great. Everyone's at peace. We got to keep these machines oiled. Let's play some war games. Is that what's happening? Okay, the professionals around the world who aren't on CNN and the New York Times are saying, no, this is serious. You got people saying, hey, man, these aren't drills. These are deployments. These guys are setting up for something. These are building huge stadium-sized coffer dams that are for first responders for disasters. Okay, wow, somebody's expecting a lot of disasters. Okay, we've got all this volcanic activity suddenly, whether they're telling us it's real or whether it's real, they want us to know there's a lot of volcanic activity. Japan just blew. We got floods in the Midwest and an obviously controlled drought in California. It's not time for Christians to be sitting around the couch going, oh geez, what am I going to wear next week? I mean, I realize we all have the cares of everyday life, but my job, I suppose, is to try and inform people, because like Dad said, awareness is what brings you knowledge and comfort in a time of trouble. And I'm trying to make people aware of what I'm seeing and where the trouble's coming from, and it seems to be getting very close. And of course, as Christians, we're waiting for this rapture, which is keyed on the dead in Christ rising first, and that has to be 40 days before the living to fulfill the sign of Jonah. So, I mean, we're safe. I mean, it's not that. I'm talking to those people that don't have their mind in where we're really at in that picture. It's coming to it. It is coming to it. This is a controlled war on terror. This is a controlled climate weapons. I mean, you got the defense minister or secretary of Russia sort of in a vehement tone just the other day talking about these weather weapons of America and how PO'd the Russians are, that we're killing their crops, that we're controlling weather, that we're fighting this way, and that they got secret weapons of their own. And if they need to use them, they'll use them, and they're threatening 120 million people dead if they use the weapons they've got. Now, that all used to be Cold War saber rattling, but it's not anymore. Why? How do we know that? Because of the weapons that are being deployed all over the place, because of the hot wars that we're fighting right now all over the Middle East for, going on 15 years now. I mean, this is really an absurdity for this peace-loving, democratic, freedom, seeking United Nations ideal of a peaceful world. Yeah, it's peaceful because we conquer everybody, and then we put them under the United Nations. We vaccinate them with the vaccines we say they have to take. They grow the crops, United Nations, World Bank, Agricultural Committee, etc., eventually says, okay, you grow this and you do that, and we'll ship you rice, and we'll ship your stuff over here. And that's the world the way they see it. Zones that they use for their benefit, not sovereign nations, or even more important, individual people with inalienable rights. And that's where it comes down to that really big thing that old G. Edward Griffin talks about, the difference between that collectivist mentality and the individualist, and the idea that, who gives you your rights? If we have rights that are given by God, that are inalienable, that come with the fact that we are conscious, embodied conscious, and nobody has the right to take those rights. Well, that's why, the activists are fighting this whole New World Order thing, even though a lot of it is, they're fighting a phantom. They're being given a bunch of shadows to box. But it's not that there isn't a New World Order. It's just that it's not half the stuff people are afraid of, and it's twice as bad, is the real truth. Anyway, that's all I got this week, Dad.
Oh, thank you, Tony. Another conversation that I really, truly enjoyed, because it brought out and emphasized the broader scale of the picture of what's going on in the Middle East. And our intention always has been from the beginning is to inform you, keep you informed, so that you can grow in knowledge, because with that comes comfort. I mean, the closer that we get to the rapture, the more comfortable I get. Understanding Christianity makes me understand and be able to look in a mirror and say, look, I got to change this and that and this about my life, because I don't want to miss the rapture. You see? Yeah, I don't want to be spit out. Doesn't mean I'm not going to be saved, but I want to be saved in that first round. I want to go in the next order of march into heaven. The togma that's coming up, as Paul put it. That's where I want to go. I don't want to wait for the next 1,000 years until the dead raise again. Nope, I want to be informed, and because I do, my family is, and I consider all you folks who listen to us part of my family. Because you listen. And not only do you listen, you support. And supporting this word is biblical. You give to the storehouse where you get your meat. And we do all this for free because it is a storehouse. And you support it because you want to have a place to gain that hilarity and joy that comes from giving with the way God said to give. You give to the storehouse where you get your meat, and you do it with hilarity and joy, frankincense. And so if this is a storehouse where you get your meat, then stand up and cheer loudly, because it's offering time. And we appreciate those offerings and keep us coming to you. And it's the only way. Otherwise, we'd fail and this word would stop. So until we see you again next week, for Tony, I'm Brother Sal. We want you to have a great day in Christ.